Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Monday, September 22nd, 2025. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. In today's episode, we'll talk with Variety's box office chief, Rebecca Rubin, about week starts at the multiplexes for him and A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, as Demon Slayer Infinity Castle keeps its grip on number one. And senior TV editor Brian Steinberg brings us up to speed on the big story in Hollywood, Disney's benching of Jimmy Kimmel. But before we get to that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. Spider-Man star Tom Holland suffered a mild concussion on the set of Spider-Man Brand New Day. He's expected back at work in a few days. Nick Cassavetes has signed on to direct the U.S. remake of The Boy with Pink Pants. The young adult movie with a strong anti-bullying message was a big hit in Italy for Eagle Pictures. Eddie Redmayne's Day of the Jackal series has hired a new writer for season 2. David Harrower has stepped in as creator Ronan Bennett steps back. The thriller airs on Peacock and Sky. My colleague Alex Rittman in London has the scoop. You can read that story and so much more on Variety.com right now. Now we turn to conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. If it's Monday, we're talking box office with Rebecca Rubin, our senior film and media reporter. Rebecca breaks down the weekend results, and she points to beacons on the horizon for the box office in the shape of Leonardo DiCaprio and Taylor Swift. Rebecca Rubin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Rebecca, tell us what's going on out there. How did the big openers this weekend do?
After two really strong back-to-back weekends in September with the latest Conjuring movie and the Demon Slayer, this was a pretty soft weekend at the box office. There were two new movies that opened. Him, which is a sports thriller that was produced by Jordan Peele, and then A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, which is a romantic drama with Margot Robbie and Colin Farrell, and neither of those movies really ignited the box office in a meaningful way.
Do you think it's just movie going is it's a typical lull, or do you think that it was a lackluster product this weekend that kept a lid on receipts?
I would say it's probably the latter. I think that it was a lackluster weekend in terms of new releases because we've seen in September, if people want to come out to see a movie, even if it's not something that's on most of Hollywood's radar, audiences can come out in huge numbers, whatever the weekend is. In this case, I think the two new releases just did not have the reviews or the word of mouth to get people talking. Him had a 28% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is quite a negative aggregate score, and A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, beyond it being a bit of a tongue twister, also had similarly negative reviews and word of mouth from audiences.
For A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, you had Margot Robbie, you had Colin Farrell. Finally, after we finally got a look at Colin Farrell again without all that penguin makeup. But it also seems like the kind of movie, an adult drama that you just don't see at the multiplexes as much. What audience do you think the distributor was going for with this movie?
Sony actually positioned this movie, I remember vividly when they announced it, as a female event picture in the vein of It Ends With Us, which was the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni movie that, despite all the controversy, was a huge box office success. And so they were very clearly saying here, we are going after this underserved female audience. To call it a female event picture, I had not seen that verbiage before, and so they were being very declarative on who they were trying to get with this movie. And like you said, it's not really the type of movie that we see succeeding in movie theaters anymore. We've seen movies from other genres succeed despite the odds, but typically when they are succeeding despite the odds, they have behind them the great reviews, the word of mouth, and I think this movie just misfired on the execution. And so if you already have a movie that critics and audiences don't like, it's that much harder to get them to pay money to go see it.
How has the hold been for Demon Slayer and for Conjuring, the movies that did light up the September box office?
Demon Slayer was the number 1 movie again at the North American and the international box office, and in North America, it made $17.3 million, so it had a pretty significant 75% decline from its opening weekend, which of course, set a record for anime film, grossing 70 million. And so that is a pretty brutal decline. But if you are just looking at it from a numbers perspective, $17 million dollars for an anime film would have been impressive in the film's first weekend. So the fact that it made that much in its second weekend and this movie has already grossed over $100 million dollars in North America speaks to the enthusiasm for it. And so it was on par kind of with expectations that it would have a big drop, but it still is raking in significant money.
So there was good news for Sony this weekend as well. How about Conjuring?
Conjuring as well had a pretty good third weekend. This is its third weekend of release, and it made $13 million. And with this weekend's total, Conjuring Last Rites, which is I think it's the fourth Conjuring movie and the ninth in the overall franchise. It is now the highest grossing of the franchise with over 150 million domestically and 400 million globally. And this movie actually is continuing a stellar run, not just for Warner Brothers, but New Line, which is a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. And New Line, with this movie now, has crossed the $1 billion mark just in 2025. And that is mostly thanks to horror hits like Final Destination Bloodlines, Weapons. And so New Line is really cleaning up this year with horror movies that are getting audiences to turn out in droves.
I could make a lot of cheap jokes about horror and the time that we are living in, but I'm just going to leave it at that. What should we look forward to in the coming weeks at the box office? What are exhibitors excited about?
So, if you asked anybody a few months ago, they would probably say that Paul Thomas Anderson's new movie, One Battle After Another, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, is a huge risk. And it still is because it cost $130 million dollars to produce or more, depending on who you ask. But Warner Brothers has as well been on this epic box office streak, and all of these movies that people were not expecting to be massive successes have become just that. And so nobody wants to bet against Warner Brothers at this point, and there's a chance that One Battle After Another, which has been pretty rapturously reviewed, could become another commercial win for Warner Brothers. That would be very exciting to see because it's targeting more of an adult audience, and that is also a demographic that is not as catered to as the box office. Another movie that exhibitors are quite excited about is Taylor Swift's newly announced the release party of a showgirl. And of course, that is tied to her new album that is coming out in October. And she has been a big supporter of theatrical with her concert film that was released in 2023. And so no matter what this movie does, it's not going to make the business that the concert film did because it's a very different project. But any money that this movie makes is just gravy that they were not expecting even a few weeks ago.
Taylor Swift is the gift that keeps on giving to all media. And I'm so glad you mentioned One Battle After Another because, dear listeners, you're going to hear from Owen Gleiberman, Variety's chief film critic, on this film in Tuesday's episode. So thank you for teasing that, Rebecca. And as always, thank you for your insights.
Thanks for having me, and I will be eager to see how One Battle After Another does.
And now we'll hear from Brian Steinberg on the latest industry conflagration that has protesters lining up outside of Disney offices. As I record this Monday morning, Jimmy Kimmel is still on indefinite suspension from his late night show at ABC. It's not canceled, but we don't know when he'll be back either. Brian Steinberg, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here.
You and others at Variety have been busy on the Jimmy Kimmel beat ever since this story really blew up Wednesday afternoon when Disney made the decision to pull him off the air abruptly. So a lot has transpired between then and now that we are talking. Where do you think things stand right now in terms of the decision-making process for ABC and for Team Kimmel?
I think it's a genuine effort, Cynthia, to want to have him come back on the air. This is a longtime employee of Disney. He's been doing this for more than 2 decades. He's been an ambassador for ABC and the company, hosting the Oscars, other projects, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
So, in terms of how things went down, Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, goes on Benny Johnson's podcast and makes what sure sounds like a threat against ABC about very upset about Kimmel's comments, which had gotten a lot of backlash that day from people certainly in conservative and MAGA media circles. Hours later, you have Nexstar, the single biggest owner of TV stations, saying our 32 ABC affiliate stations will not air Jimmy Kimmel. That's a significant blow to his distribution, in addition to a bad blow to the PR. And then minutes after that came Sinclair, another huge station owner, saying the same thing, asking for even more wildly unrealistic things for a TV station group to ask of talent. Let me ask you, Brian, does ABC pull him just on Brendan Carr's comments, or was he pulled because Nexstar and Sinclair said we are yanking our stations?
I have to imagine it's really because of the Sinclair and Nexstar. Nexstar is a large, maybe even soon to be larger station owner. Those are stations in New Orleans, Salt Lake City, Nashville, places that Kimmel needs to reach. Kimmel will do well in LA and New York because that's the show. But you need to reach people in the South, the Midwest. Those stations are important to the overall distribution of the show. Without that, then all of a sudden the ratings go down. Then you have to talk to advertisers about why the ratings have gone down, what they're paying for when they pay for the guarantees they've been promised by ABC. I think, it's a problematic situation you're in. Now, can they get around it? Can they go to put them on Hulu or Disney Plus and get around that situation and do some ad deals?
Disney has plenty of platforms to get Kimmel out, but the strength of broadcast TV, and you wonder if something prolonged like this could really continue to chip away of that, the classic network affiliate relationship. The Jimmy Kimmel flap is coming at a time when there's been simmering tensions with the networks over how much the station groups pay the networks to help the networks pay for pricey things like football and big events. And this is obviously happening at a time when traditional late night TV does not have the pull it did even recently.
Yeah, I think what's happening late night is the fragmentation has hurt it. When David Letterman announced he was going to retire, a lot of folks to try to throw spaghetti at the wall, see if they can get their own share of late night audience. For a while, we had like MTV tried their hand at it, National Geographic, the science late night show. Now you have the late night hosts now have to go for a base rather than for everybody. Johnny Carson had the whole nation watching him, and our current bunch of late night hosts are doing political humor to get a lot of the success of their show these days depends on how many YouTube hits they get and X pass along and viral hits. And to do that, you need to do hot talk, politics, barbs, really kind of sometimes stuff that I think a previous generation like Arsenio Hall or Pat Sajak or Johnny Carson or Tom Snyder would not do because they had a much broader crowd watching it every night and they had to be mindful of that. So the economics are weaker because the hosts now have niches rather than the whole world watching.
Do you think this gets resolved middle of this week? Like, how much longer can this impasse go on?
We're at the start of a brand new TV season. You want Kimmel on the air for ABC. You want that audience gathering at night. You follow them back to Good Morning America in the morning. Disney is a pillar of the creative community in Hollywood. And a lot of people who are actors, directors, producers are aghast at the decision to pull them off the air like this. Couldn't they have had him come on and explain himself in a way that everyone can agree upon? The longer he's off, the more this festers with Disney's base, its employees, its creative community, people who work for them in movies and TV shows and other things, also kind of ticked off. I mean, Bob Iger and Dana Walden have taken a thorny path. It is difficult to see how they be able to please everybody. They may have to, there are business concerns, there are creative concerns. Hollywood's watching. Washington is watching. It's difficult.
It's a diplomatic mission. It's a business mission. And with all things Disney, it's often in a fishbowl. And of course, the people that you mentioned, Bob Iger, Dana Walden, there's a lot of scrutiny on them because there is a transition coming for Disney in the leadership ranks. They have promised that there will be a transition sometime in the early part of 2026. So there's never a good time for a crisis, but this would probably be a particularly bad time for everything going on. Well, it'll be very interesting to watch what comes Monday and beyond. Brian, thank you for working hard to cover this.
Thank you.
Let's give the last word on this segment to John Oliver. The host of HBO's Last Week Tonight makes a great point about whether Nexstar and Sinclair really qualify as local broadcasters, given their size and scope and the level of their activity before the FCC. Here's a clip from Sunday night's episode.
Well, but more than that, claiming this is simply local broadcasters responding to their community values is pretty hard to take, given that this wasn't a bunch of independent stations taking a stand. It was two of the biggest local TV ownership groups in the country making sweeping decisions for all the affiliates they own. Calling these companies local broadcasters is like describing Coca-Cola as a neighborhood soda shop or Boeing as a mom-and-pop plane crash business. It makes no sense. Look, the sequence of events here could not be clearer because it was all done in plain view. Carr leaned on broadcasters to take down Kimmel. They did that, sometimes even directly citing Carr while doing so, and then Carr celebrated with a fun gif. That sure seems like a pretty clear case of the government pressuring companies to censor speech.
As we close out today's episode, the only certainty we have about this week is that there will be a lot of news. We are waiting for news on the Jimmy Kimmel front. We are waiting for news around Warner Brothers Discovery and what's going on with that bidding process. But I wanted to share a few thoughts from my weekend in San Diego. I attended the Proximo conference focused on Latino entrepreneurs and business growth. It's always interesting to talk to people who work in other sectors about business issues, headwinds, opportunities. It was a great mix of people in San Diego. I'm so grateful to conference organizer Nelly Galan for inviting me. I'm grateful also to my panelists who delivered great conversations, producer Alexis Garcia, Hearst Media's Angelica Rosas McDaniels, and Nueva Network's Renee Alegria. I was also honored to meet the great author Sandra Cisneros. Without question, every business conference should close out with a dance party. At the end of the tribute to Cisneros on Saturday night, the tables were empty, the dance floor was packed, and it was joyous. Before we go, congrats to Ian Holder and Tariq Stewart. They've just been named Senior Vice Presidents of A&R for Capitol Records, overseeing the company's urban A&R team. Holder comes to Capitol from Sony Music Publishing. Stewart was with RCA Records. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Rebecca Rubin and Brian Steinberg. Special thanks to restaurant Cocinas Del Monte in San Diego for not throwing me out while I recorded the box office segment before I hopped on a bus back to LA. Sticks, Nicks, Hick Picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.